is Doug DeMuro, and today we are going to talk about the 12 most surprising cars I have ever reviewed. So the 12 cars that I reviewed that I showed up and I was expecting it to be kind of average or, not that great, whatever, and then I actually spent some time with the car, drove the car, and was shocked and surprised at how fantastic it was, or how special, or how amazing, or whatever. The 12 cars that most surprised me when I went to review them. Let's get started. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era. We've had some great sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this new Toyota Supra, wonderfully modified, which sold for $54,500. This Buick Roadmaster wagon lifted for off-road driving, hilarious build, which sold for over $10,000. And this Mercedes E55 AMG wagon, which was offered with no reserve and sold for $28,000. If you're looking to sell your cool car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. You will get the most traffic and the most views on your car. And if you're looking to buy a cool modern enthusiast car, Cars and Bids has great selection and daily auctions at carsandbids.com. Okay, so I'm gonna go in reverse order here. I'll start with the 12th most surprising car, and then I'm gonna get down to the number 1 most surprising car I have ever reviewed. This is an interesting topic, I think, because I generally know what to expect when I go and review a car. I generally, I've seen the car, I get the specs, it'll be like this. But sometimes they really do shock me, and I come away like, even after I have driven so many cars, I come away like, wow, that was really unexpectedly amazing. And so these are the 12 most unexpectedly amazing. So anyway, let's start with number 12. That would be the Mercedes CLK 63 AMG Black Series. I reviewed this car pretty early in my kind of YouTube car review career, and prior to that, my experience with AMG was primarily high-powered cars that didn't really handle all that great, better than normal, but they were all about fast. And the CLK Black Series it's fast, but it's all about like getting sideways and kind of crazy handling and crazy excitement and amazing thrills. And I loved that car so much. And I showed up thinking, the regular CLK was kind of a boring coupe that was driven by old people, very comfortable, and you listen to classical music when you're driving. I never expected the CLK Black to be so insane. And I'd actually read like, hey, this is a pretty insane car. Like, prepare yourself. But I wasn't really prepared for how crazy it was and how slidey it was, and the back end comes out, and it was a lot of fun. And on that same vein, my number 11 most surprising car is the Mercedes AMG GT 4-door. This car hasn't gotten as much press as I think it deserves. I have probably never driven a 4-door car that handles as well as this one. You hear AMG GT, you expect it to be fast and amazing and whatever, but I mean, the coupe, of course, is incredibly good handling, incredibly tight cornering. I just wasn't expecting they would be able to translate that so well to the 4-door car. And I reviewed the 63 version, like the high performance, ultra crazy fast V8, the best one in the line. And I just loved the thing. And, sedans are kind of dying. That car's really expensive. It has not gotten a lot of coverage, but personally, I find that to be one of the most desirable sedan models ever. And frankly, I'm kind of excited for them to start depreciating because they get down to a certain number and it becomes really, really an attractive car. I was expecting that to be great, but not as great as it is. Okay, next up, number 10 most surprising car I have ever reviewed. That would be the Mazda RX-8. I have to admit, the RX-8, I've seen them for years, obviously driving around, and you hear stories about how they're unreliable. And you look at the numbers and they don't have that much torque. They have decent power, but not that much torque. And also, I don't find the RX-8 to be an attractive car. I think it's actually quite ugly. I think the front fender looks stupid, and then the elongated passenger compartment for the rear doors looks I think it's way out of proportion. And so I kind of made assumptions like, okay, this car's not gonna drive all that well, but people wanna see the review, whatever, I'll just do it. I went and filmed it, and just within a couple minutes, you realize driving that car, no, forget the unreliability, forget the low torque figure, forget the styling, this thing drives great. Handling incredibly precise, decent acceleration, surprisingly so, and it really comes alive at like 6,000 RPM and really gives you even more. But I was just really surprised at how quickly the car steered and how well it handled. The one I drove was like 110,000 plus miles, but it was light on its feet, tremendously fun to toss around. And I came away from that thinking, boy, you know, maybe I should have had an RX-8 over the years. Like, that is a pretty special car and it drives pretty well. And I was impressed with it. Okay, next up, number 9, most surprising car I've ever reviewed. That would be the Lancia Delta Integrale. So this was a 1980s hatchback that was sort of like hotted up to make it like the ultimate hot hatchback. It was the road version of a very successful rally car. And my entire life, I always heard about these Integrales, these Delta Integrales. They're cool. These special cars are only available in Europe, Asia. You know, they're not sold in the United States. Well, they're finally becoming legal, and so I reviewed an Integrale Evo 2, the very last and best version. And what I expected was, I thought it would be cool. I really like cars like this, sort of these 80s like muscular cars, not too much power, but I also thought it would be fragile. And there's nothing I hate more than a fragile car. I love to throw cars around, to really use them, to stomp on the accelerator pedal, to really have some fun. And I'm not a big fan when you have to be careful. And that car, you know, it's Italian, it's old, and does anybody know how to work on them? You're nervous. So I get in that thing, and I had that in mind, but then I start driving it, and I drive it a little bit harder and a little bit harder, and it just rewards you so well. It is so much fun to just stomp on and throw around, and I loved that car so much. When it came time to buy like a kind of weird, cool, you know, imported car from this era, I bought the Audi RS2, which I also absolutely love, but the Integrale is more fun to drive. It's more exciting, more fun to drive, and I was really surprised by that. I really thought I would have to just be careful and be nervous, but the truth is the car rewards pushing it, and it's so exciting. I really liked it. Okay, next up, number 8 most surprising car I have ever reviewed. Really getting into these now. Number 8 is the BAC Mono. Okay, a little preface. I don't like super hard-edged performance cars. Like, the ride is so rough and it's so loud, and they're fun to drive for my videos, and I can objectively review them and say, oh, this is better than the other hard-edged performance car, whatever. But to actually operate, I just like, oh, it's so loud. Generally speaking, I'm not I like a lot of the hypercars and supercars, but when it gets too raw, it's just not my thing. So I go to review the BAC Mono, and I'm like, all right, like, I'll do this because it's cool and whatever, but it's not my type of car. Well, you know, and I do the whole review, the whole quirks and features, and I'm like, God, this thing, you know, it's open seat and all these ridiculous compromises you have to make for performance. And then I'm finally ready to drive it. I'm like, all right, let's get this out of the way. Get in the car and drive it, and it was just a blast. It was so much fun. It was like a roller coaster. I have never experienced maybe that level of like raw emotional fun in a car. And you know, the interesting thing about it is I have also reviewed the Polaris Slingshot and the Ariel Atom, and both of those they're similar concepts. They were cool cars, but like the BAC was just so much better. It was a better car to drive, more fun, better put together, better steering and handling. It just was a great driving car, and it was just a total novelty. I still don't think I would ever want to actually own one and deal with all those compromises, but I don't know. I thought it was a pretty cool car, and it vastly exceeded my expectations, considering I was expecting to really not like it all that much, given the type of car that it is. Okay, next up, number 7 most surprising car I have ever reviewed. This is an interesting one. It is the Ford Fiesta ST. This is interesting for a couple reasons. Number one, before driving the Fiesta ST, I had spent considerable time in a Focus ST, like, you know, years earlier, but like a lot of time, like hours of time. I had a friend who had one, I drove it a lot. And so you would think that I wouldn't be that surprised or whatever by the Fiesta ST, but oh, was I. That car, you don't expect Ford to make a great hot hatchback. I know they do in Europe, but in the States, they are not known for that. They do not do that. It's not part of Ford's thing. They make trucks, they make kind of like big sedans like the Taurus. They don't make a good, truly good hot hatchback. And one thing American brands do to compensate for that is they just throw more power at their cars. And they think more power will just solve the dynamic issues. And that's not the case in this situation. The Fiesta ST drives amazingly. It is tons of fun to toss around. It is incredibly exciting and interesting, and the steering and handling is truly amazing. Like one of the very best of any hot hatchback. And on paper, that car, 170 horsepower, you're like, I don't really know. Is this thing gonna be any good? It's good. It's not that fast, but you can just beat on it to no end and just have fun. And I love that. I love using a whole car. I love a car that lets you just kind of slam on it without braking or having trouble, whatever. It was just cool. And it vastly exceeded my expectations considering what I thought Ford was capable of producing. Truly a world-class hot hatchback, probably the best subcompact hot hatchback I've ever driven. Okay, next up, number 6, car that surprised me most, that would be the McLaren P1 GTR. Now this will surprise you because you're like, how did the P1 GTR surprise you? Of course it's an amazing, insane car, you're an idiot. And that's true, but I generally don't love to review race cars. It goes back to the same things I was talking about the BAC Mono. They're rough, they're uncomfortable, and in my reviews, in order to film all the segments that I do, you have to get in and out of each car maybe 25 or 30 times during the review. And race cars, getting in and out is really hard. Doing the Porsche 935, like folding myself in around the little tubes, it was a disaster. So when I did the P1 GTR, I was expecting the same. Just not gonna be good, gonna be really annoying and disastrous. Oh, I'm not excited for this. I'd already done the regular P1. Race car videos don't generally do all that well on my channel, so it's like, why am I even bothering with this? And then I drove it. And I've driven all the hypercars. That's the best. I love them all. They're all great. They're amazing in their own ways. They all have very special and unique and cool characteristics. That car is the most raw, insane, like unreal performance, just like slams you in the face. It's so amazing. If you want the most incredible, visceral, raw feel of any car, that's the one. And you know, it's funny because people buy these GT3s and GT3RSs and they think they're so like tracky and hard edged and they brag to their friends like, oh, you drive a comfortable car compared to my GT3RS. Well, the P1 GTR makes a GT3RS look like a Lexus. Like, it's way less comfortable, but it's also way more raw and insane, and the sound that it makes is insane, and the performance level is crazy, and I came in with that actually loving that car, despite sort of a preconceived bias that I wouldn't really enjoy it all that much because it was a race car. It was a ton of fun. Okay, next up, number 5 most surprising car I have ever filmed. We're really getting down here. Number 5, Shelby GT350R. So I've told this story before, and you gotta understand, go back to when I reviewed this car. It was like 4 years ago. Back then, American brands were still not known for being able to compete on the track with European brands. All the American muscle cars just had a lot of power, they went in a straight line, but they weren't good handlers, and everyone knew that. And so, the Shelby GT350R was really one of the first cars that kind of changed that. The Viper ACR did too, but at a crazy price point. The GT350R was a more reasonable dollar value. But I went into it without really realizing that. It was early in my career reviewing cars, didn't know all that much about it, and so I show up to review it, and it's kind of a rainy day, and I had plans later that day with a friend I hadn't seen in forever. I was really excited. I just wanted to get it done. So I kind of, shoot the car, and then we drive it. And unbelievable. Vastly exceeded my expectations in every way. The car steers incredibly, it handles incredibly. It just changed from that moment forward. It changed my perception of what a Mustang is, to be totally honest. It's no longer like this muscle car that only goes in a straight line. Suddenly, somehow, the Americans know how to make a truly amazing car. And frankly, this same thing could basically be said for the Camaro ZL1 as well, but I review that later. So I'd already kind of had that notion was kind of changing in my mind. But now the American brands are making cars like this, the new GT500. There's other cars that you can look at track numbers and say, yeah, they can do this. But back then, I was just astonished at how well this car drove, how well it cornered and handled. And frankly, I really kind of want a GT350R, but I feel like if I had that and the Ford GT, people would start accusing me of shilling for Ford. I don't want to go down that road. But I think it's an amazing car. It is one of my very favorite recent sports cars, period. Okay, next up, number 4 most surprising car I've ever reviewed. That would be the Pagani Zonda. Hear me out. I know this sounds insane. How is a Zonda beating your expectations? Your expectations are already really high. The thing about these crazy supercars and hypercars is when you show up to review them, you know they're going to be really fast, but generally speaking, you can't like toss them around like you can with like a Miata or a GT350R or a Fiesta ST or an S2000 or RX-8. You can't throw around a Koenigsegg. It's just too everything. It's too fast, it's too expensive, it's too dangerous, it might break loose, and you have that thought driving LaFerrari, and you have that thought driving P1. You're just afraid to really throw it around unless like you're a billionaire and it's throwaway money. The Zonda is the only one of these hypercars, supercars that I have ever driven that really felt like it could be driven like a Miata. The gear lever was just amazing. The feel of the shifter, one of the best I've ever felt. Same with the clutch. Perfectly tuned and designed clutch and gear lever. but also just the steering and handling made it feel like it wasn't that expensive, wasn't that intimidating of a car. It just drove like a good, fun, mid-engine car. And if you closed your eyes, not that you do that on a Zonda, but if you didn't know, you could be convinced you were driving like an S2000, just mid-engine and like, you know, tuned differently and changed up, but like made by Honda, like an NSX, made by Honda to be great to use and operate. And I was so intimidated by the Zonda going into filming it because like this is basically a one of one. You can't get these in America. It's an incredibly rare and special car. I'm very nervous about driving it. And that car, more than any hypercar or supercar I've ever driven in my entire life, it almost was like your grandmother saying, don't worry about it. Everything is gonna be fine. Just drive and have fun. And that's what it felt like. All the other cars, you come away, you still feel intimidated, not the Zonda. Okay, next up, number 3 car that I reviewed that surprised me the most. People can accuse me of being biased, but it was the 2005 Ford GT. Now, I wanna make a quick point here. Obviously, I own a Ford GT, a 2005 Ford GT myself. I only bought that car after I reviewed a different one on my YouTube channel. And the reason that I bought it is because it was that good. It's another example like the GT350 and frankly like the Zonda. I went there expecting one thing and got something way better. You know, the GT350, I went there expecting like a muscle car only good in a straight line. I was kind of had the same thought for the Ford GT. Like it's just a big V8. I know people tune them to do like mild drag races and get some crazy numbers. So I thought this car was gonna be all about speed. But the reality is that's not true. It handles tremendously well. It's very fun to drive. And you hear all these stories about the Ford GT being dangerous, whatever. I find it to be actually rather forgiving. Yes, it's a lot of power with no stability control, so you have to know what you're doing, but it's also like you in the car. And once you get a lot of experience in one, you start to feel pretty confident. And it's just a great car. It also has a fantastic clutch and shifter action. The clutch is so smooth, so easy to drive. I get out of my Ford GT and into my RS2 and I'm like, get me back in the GT. It's so much easier. The clutch, the shifter, after the shifter kind of warms up, it is one of the great shifters ever to exist. And the car is just so iconic and special, and it's so neat to me that such an iconic car is also great to drive. I always knew it was cool looking, whatever, but I never truly expected Ford in 2005 building like the 500 and the Freestyle to be able to make a world-class supercar, but that's what they did. It really was a world-class supercar, and the reason the values have stayed high, I think in part, is because they didn't make that many. It's retro style cool, but also it just drives better than everything else did. Better than Gallardo, better than 430. It was just amazing, and I loved it so much I bought one. Okay, next up, number 2 most surprising car I have ever reviewed. This one will probably surprise you. That would be the Fiat 500 Abarth. This is the second most surprising car I have ever reviewed. That's probably because my perception of Fiat and Fiat Chrysler before I got into the car was dismal to say the least. You know, this was about 5 years ago, the time I first drove one. And Fiat Chrysler was kind of known for just making bad cars. They were unreliable, constant recalls, tons of issues. I mean, there were pictures on the internet of Jeep Wranglers being delivered with different fenders, like the Rubicon fender on one side and the Sport fender on the other from the factory. That's how I thought about Chrysler. And so 500 Abarth comes out, and I've driven the regular 500 by that point, and that also is not that good of a car. Quality is poor, not all that nice, really slow. I mean, it's hard to imagine making that into anything other than a crappy little subcompact car. Then I drove the Abarth, and the sound, the fury, the drive, the handling, it's so much fun to toss around. It's such an exciting little car. And I couldn't believe they turned that thing from being stupid Fiat Chrysler making crappy cars to an unbelievable little hatchback. And I said earlier the Fiesta ST is my favorite subcompact hatchback ever. That's probably true because it has 4 doors, so it's more practical than the 500 Abarth, but the 500 Abarth is more fun. It's just insane. It's a crazy little car, and you can pick them up now for like $8 grand, and I truly can't think of a better car for $8,000, which is funny to say because if you asked me to recommend any other 2012 Chrysler product, I wouldn't. That's that. And finally, our number 1 most surprising car I have ever reviewed in my entire life, Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG. This goes back to what I was saying before about the CLK Black Series. You know, you hear AMG and you think high-powered car in a straight line. And even if you've driven stuff like the Black Series, the AMG GT 4-door, you know, you still look at the SLS and it's got this big engine and this throaty exhaust, and I've driven the SLR, which was a straight line car purely. I mean, that thing doesn't handle. And you get into the SLS expecting something similar, It's a Mercedes-Benz, 2012. You know, they were all about S65s and SL65s and fast straight line cars, and it's so perfect finesse. The handling and the steering in that car are unbelievable. And I actually think the SLS remains one of the great bargains of supercars today. You can pick up an SLS Roadster for like 100 grand. And the reason they're so cheap is because then the AMG GT came out, and that's a lot cheaper, and it kind of cannibalized the look of that car. And even the Gullwings are still a bargain when you consider the driving experience. I think the SLS is one of the most unbelievable to drive cars I have ever driven. The precision, the handling, the feel of that car was so much better than I ever would have given AMG credit for, and especially at that time period. And it just totally, again, that was another transformative car. It changed my opinion of what AMG was capable of. Like, oh, they make straight line fast cars with big exhaust. No, actually, they can make a world-class finesse supercar. I was blown away by that car, and frankly, I still am. So there you go. That's it. Those are the most surprising cars I have ever driven, I've ever reviewed. It's rare that I'm surprised. Usually I go in kind of knowing what to expect, but it does still happen maybe once every 2 or 3 months that I show up and I'm just blown away. And these are the 12 cars that blew me away the most.